All right, let's bring in our panel of parliamentary journalists now. Lots to talk about today. Susan Delacourt is a columnist with the Toronto Star. Althia Raj is a political journalist. And Joël-Denis Bellavance, the parliamentary bureau chief for Presse. Good to see you all. Thanks for being here. Nice to see you all again. Susan, let me start with you. The House rising for the summer. You have made no bones about saying good riddance. How come?
Well, I guess I shouldn't be saying this on a channel devoted to people who may love Parliament as much as I sometimes do. But I think, we've seen it over the past few weeks. This Parliament seems to have run its course. It was strange to begin with, but it's had an end of days feeling about it for the last few weeks. It does seem like everybody is interested in moving on, not just from the pandemic, but from everything associated with the pandemic, including this weird hybrid parliament. So I thought that the Prime Minister was going to wait until September to make the case that Parliament was not working. He was building up to that case, but he's been making that for a few weeks. Pablo Rodriguez, his House leader, has been making that case. Prime Minister did it yesterday, and just watching Question Period today, I thought, no, it's time. It's time that everybody needs a fresh start.
All right, Althea, let me pick up on what Susan's saying here. The Prime Minister did lament the toxicity and the obstruction in Parliament this week. We've lived through a lot of minority parliaments, all of us in this town covering politics in the past 2 decades. Is this one really any worse than the others?
No, I don't think so. And in fact, I will recall that back in December, the Prime Minister was making these very arguments as well in his end-of-the-year interviews. He was complaining that the opposition was being obstructionist, that the parties had very different visions of what life post-pandemic should be like. And then, of course, the third wave hit, and we stopped hearing that Parliament was obstructionist. Not that it was less obstructionist. If anything, the committees became more obstructionist. But it wasn't until the feeling seems to be they've decided that they absolutely do want to go with late summer, early fall, that we have been hearing these complaints yet again. There is no reason why the Prime Minister needs to go, actually. And I think that the NDP leader made that point earlier today in his press conference, where he said that, they're willing to support the Liberals for the next 2 years to go through this full 4-year mandate. But the problem is the Prime Minister does not want to negotiate. And frankly, there's a lot of truth to that.
Joël-Denis, what do you think? What we've seen the last week or so here is that the government talks about obstruction and toxicity in Parliament, and yet they've got 4 really important bills. They managed to get them all passed in kind of record time here in the last number of days. They're off to the Senate, where their fate for some of them is in doubt. But is there a case to be made here that we need an election because Parliament's not working?
Well, it's true that, as Althia mentioned, Mr. Trudeau has raised in the past that the Parliament might be becoming dysfunctional, but he never used the word toxicity, which is a new word to say that this space needs to end. We need to pull the plug on this one. And I fully agree with Susan. I think this Parliament has run its course. It's time for a fresh beginning to, maybe separate from the pandemic and the end of it that is coming to a close, as we are getting closer to having 75% of the population having 2 doses of the vaccine. But the Prime Minister is making the case for an election. It reminds me the kind of a narrative that Stephen Harper was making in 2008 when he said that the opposition parties were trying to defeat him, so he needed to go and have a little visit at the Governor General's office residence to ask for the dissolution of Parliament, and talking about the
which turned out, by the way, to be a longish visit. But
yes, but talking about the Governor General, Peter, the Prime Minister mentioned today in a French radio interview that an appointment is coming soon. So this is another hint that maybe he plans to appoint someone to be able to visit that person to ask for the dissolution of Parliament.
Right. You don't want to go knock on the door and have no one home.
Exactly.
You need to have somebody there. Susan, we've seen this rush of legislation in the last number of days here. Even today, the government introducing new online hate crime measures at the very last hour, as they have no chance of passing unless Parliament comes back in the fall. What's the strategy here to put on the very last day of the sitting to put new legislation in the window?
Well, my understanding originally was that C10, the one that turned out to be hugely problematic, and the hate crime hate online bill were kind of come together. That that this was the government's way of saying, look, we are modernizing our laws to take account of the digital universe out there. I think what happened was C10 went off in directions they hadn't anticipated. So this is getting introduced to say it was part of the package. I joked in a column today that there's going to be a whole chapter in the Liberal Red Book of 2021 titled "Things We Intended to Do" or "Things We Tried to Do." I think that gun control advocates are a little bit angry about how that fell off the agenda as well, too, until the last minute. There does seem to be sort of this deathbed conversion, 11th hour, oh, can I get my exam in, if that's not missing too many metaphors, at the end of this. It's sort of strange to see all this, this is all to be judged by effort and not implementation.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that, Althia, as you watch them after the very last minute roll out new legislation? And does it make you wonder, where's this legislation been for the last number of months? Why is this urgency that it all arrives on the last day of the sitting?
Well, a few thoughts. One, most of the pieces of legislation that were introduced today and yesterday, I'm thinking about the firearms regulation, the disability benefits bill, even the official languages revamp that Manani introduced last week. These are all things that were part of the Liberals' mandate letters. They were campaign promises from the last election. And because of the pandemic, the Liberals really have a pretty thin report card, if you wish, on the last 2.5 years or 2 years. So they've been trying to kind of pad their resume when they go to the polls. And these are things that are important for certain constituencies that are important to the Liberals. So the disability community, the firearms advocate in Quebec, the official languages rules. So it's understandable the hate crimes with religious communities as well. So you can see why they would be introducing these bills to say we're still committed to doing this, even though there was no time in the sitting to pass them.
What do you think, Joël-Denis?
Well, Peter, as we always do when it comes an election, we compare what the Liberal government promised, or the party that is in power promised, and what it actually accomplished. So this will be the Liberals that way will be able to say that that area of the hate line, the hate crime law was part of a long process, as part of the process of being introduced, and it's progress being made. But I would say that it's mostly window dressing. As Althia mentioned, they introduced the revamp law of Official Languages Act last week. They know full well that it will not be adopted by the House of Commons nor the Senate. So they will be able to say in their platform, we plan to do what we introduce in the spring, in the summer, some laws that we will be part of the platform. So it's more window dressing than actually trying to convince people that it's going to be fully implemented.
Susan, I've been hearing lots of rumors the last number of days about a possible cabinet shuffle to come that involves perhaps the Minister of Defense. But you listen to the Prime Minister talk about Harjit Sajjan in the last number of days, and it doesn't sound like a Prime Minister who's about to push somebody out.
No, unless you think that politics works like hockey, where they say all the nicest things about the coach just before they fire him. I've seen sort of, it's been a really interesting ratcheting up of expressions of support for Harjit Sajjan. I'd say in the last 3 weeks, you've seen a real, I think it was last Friday or last Thursday, late last week, there was this onslaught of support for the minister on Twitter from all his fellow ministers and Liberals, sort of I stand with Sajjan. So I don't put much stock in the cabinet shuffle rumors. This government tends to shuffle cabinets in response to outside events, right, like the election of Trump or the election of Doug Ford. It doesn't do them proactively. And I think they decided quite a while ago that the team they have now is one they're going to go into the election with.
Althia, what are your thoughts on that, given the latest round of criticism from the military ombudsman about interference from the minister's office? What do you think the fate is for Harjit Sajjan as we continue to talk about an imminent election.
Yeah, I agree with Susan on this. I actually think that dumping Harjit Sajjan at this point is pretty unlikely. I also don't know how the Sikh community would respond if the government seems to just be responding to very personal attacks against the National Defence Minister. And just to touch back on something that Susan mentioned, one of the reasons I think the cabinet ministers came out in full force on social media to defend their colleague was that Erin O'Toole, the Conservative leader, had made some pretty personal attacks in the House of Commons in introducing and discussing that supply day motion where he talked about the National Defence Minister lying about his military record. I think that's really what touched a nerve and kind of made everybody have his back.
Joël-Denis, what do you think about Mr. Sajjan's future?
Well, I think he's staying put until the next federal election. But afterwards, I think I would bet that he will be moved out of this portfolio because the controversy has been dogging him since last January. Now, I don't think the Prime Minister would be wise to announce a cabinet shuffle just prior to an election when he did one in January, thinking that this would be the team that we would bring to the election. And if he does go ahead with the cabinet shuffle, he may make some people unhappy in the Liberal ranks, whereas the team has to play united to be able to face the other parties in good shape.
Okay, Susan, a couple of minutes we have left here. Let me look ahead as we've been doing somewhat here. We got a preview of the Conservative election narrative today that all the parties on the left, as Erin O'Toole put it, are the same as the Liberals. They're all basically a big Liberal party, and only Conservatives offer a different vision. Jagmeet Singh talking about how there's no need for an election, first of all, but Liberals don't keep their promises. And Justin Trudeau, we got your backs. We had your backs during the pandemic. It's going to continue beyond the pandemic when we rebuild better. So I guess what's really left for me as sort of an answer is we have the sort of narratives. What's actually going to determine if there's an election or not in the fall? What is the Prime Minister going to look to make that call?
I think he's going to look to, is there any worse time? Could things get worse? Is this the optimal time? I think I've come around to this view only just recently. I actually thought that he was going to hang in there, but all signals are not. And I think the argument for him would be, look, if I wait until later, that gives the Conservatives more time to get their act together. When Canadians are feeling great and in the first, feeling freedom of getting 2 doses and the economy is picking up, I think that's when the Prime Minister wants to strike, not to endure another fall and winter of the kind of, dismal, toxic, as he called it, rhetoric in the House. So I think it's sooner rather than later because later is too risky.
What are your thoughts on that, Althia?
Well, I think I've mentioned before that I don't agree with my esteemed colleagues about the Parliament running its natural course, but I believe that the Liberals are going unless external forces conspire to prevent them from going to the polls. Basically, if what we saw in the third wave happens this summer and that there is a fourth wave and, that the country is gripped with the Delta variant and it's unsafe to hold an election, I don't believe there will be an election. But everything continues on the path that it is on, then I think we will be heading towards an election campaign in the late summer, early fall.
Joël-Denis, final word to you tonight. What are your thoughts on election timing and what the Prime Minister will actually look to? What's the calculation he's making when he makes the call?
Well, he will look on the situation on the health front, whether the pandemic is clearly under control and that we don't have a fourth wave arising. If there's a fourth wave, I think he will pull the stop to all of that because it would be not in anybody's interest to have an election if we have a fourth wave. But the chances of having a fourth wave are pretty minimal. So I would say that pretty much carved in stone that we're going to a fall election. And Mr. Trudeau has dropped so many hints over the last few days that I don't think he can stop this machinery. It's going ahead right now.
All right. Thank you all for your time tonight. Always good to talk to you. And we'll talk again soon. Everyone take care.
Thank you. You too, Peter.